that Russia, you will be held accountable. Finally, together with Ukraine and Canada, we're proud to be co-leading the working group the working group 4 of Ukraine's peace formula on release of all prisoners and deportees, the so-called human dimension of the peace formula. We appreciate the strong international commitment to advance in this work, including contributions from countries across different regions. So before I end, let me thank the organizers of the projects we're discussing today, the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group, the Center for Civil Liberties, and the Anti-Discrimination Centre in Brussels, and our dear friends at the Mission of Ukraine to the EU. So thank you all, and thank you so much for coming. Liberties.
Good morning to everyone. The ambassador, the members of the parliament, dear friends. Well, I would like to start by first of all thanking to the Norwegian mission to the EU for hosting this important event, and also to member of the parliament, Keith Wilken, for his personal support of this initiative. It is a great honor for me to speak here today about justice and accountability with the participation of prominent human rights organizations from Ukraine, and also Maxim Butkevich as a special guest. I have the privilege of knowing Maxim for more than 25 years, since our university times. And his personal story, it's a story of courage, resilience, and dignity, but it's also a story of hope and example how the person who endured what Maxim has endured is still contributing to make sure that injustice is not perpetuated. So thank you, Maxim. Today, as we witness international peace efforts led by the United States, it is imperative that people and justice are at the core of any future agreement on about the end of the Russia's war against Ukraine. And the fate of Ukrainian prisoners of war is a chilling account of all kinds of violations of international humanitarian law: torture, abuse, inhuman detention conditions, psychological and physical violence. These are not isolated incidents, but part of a systemic policy. A couple of months ago, Russia withdrew from the European Convention for the Prevention of Torture and Inhuman and Degrading Treatment or Punishment. And this step demonstrates not only Russia's complete disengagement from its international commitments, it confirms that the torture has become a widespread tool in Russia under Putin's regime. Russians systematically violate the law of war by executing Ukrainian prisoners of war. As of today, the Office of Prosecutor General of Ukraine investigates the execution of 322 cases of Ukrainian prisoners of war which were executed by Russian armed forces. Just last week, we had another 5 cases in Zaporizhzhia direction. We must do everything we can to ensure that these crimes are not forgotten and that every perpetrator is brought to justice. As already mentioned, Ambassador, exchange of prisoners of war on the all-for-all basis and return of civilian detainees, as well as forcibly deported Ukrainian children, must be part of confidence-building measure in a future ceasefire agreement. We don't know when this agreement will happen. So far, Russia doesn't show willingness to peace. So the only way forward, as we see it, is to increase pressure on the aggressor. Russia must also feel the necessary level of pressure to stop inhuman practices and violations of the international law. We are grateful to the European Union for recent sanctions against 10 Russian officials and prison personnel who were implicated in the torture of Ukrainian prisoners of war. We also appreciate the European Parliament's constant attention to the issue of Ukrainian prisoners of war and the July resolution, which demanded the release of all Ukrainian prisoners of war. While keeping pressure on Russia for the release of Ukrainian prisoners of war and return of deported children, it is crucial to stop Russia on the battlefield. Russia's advance on the front line means the expansion of territory of human rights violations. So to bring Russia to the negotiation table, we need to make sure that it is not able to continue waging the war. In this regard, we count on further EU support to make sure that Ukraine has enough capabilities to hold the front line and deter the aggressor. All instruments that EU and its member states have in place must be used. Sanctions, further military support, energy support, financial support based on the use of Russian immobilized assets. And we hope that in the coming weeks ahead of the European Council in December, these important decisions will be agreed and adopted. They would reaffirm the EU's commitment to achieving just and lasting peace for Ukraine, which is also shared by Norway and which we greatly appreciate. So I thank you for your attention and I wish a fruitful discussion today.
Thank you both. And let me introduce myself, Thijs Reut, a member of the European Parliament, and it's a true honor and pleasure to be able to host this event. And I want to thank first off the Norwegian ambassador for hosting us here in the Norway's House and for the co-organizing with the Ukrainian mission this event. And I want to subscribe fully first to what the ambassador of Norway said, because the Ukrainians every day. And we are broadcasting this also live. So I want to say this to all Ukrainians: the example you give us every day of bravery and determination in defending not only your own freedom, but also ours, makes us humble and should prompt us to action and not to further waiting. Europe knows from its own dark history that the absence of conflict is not the same as durable peace. Lasting peace requires meaningful processes to help societies move from conflict to positive peace. And transitional justice is key in that, and not the only element, but an essential pillar of transitional justice is truth and accountability. Let me underline 2 points briefly before we begin and before I will moderate the panel. First is Russia's war is not only the crime of aggression, it is waged deliberately with barbarity, mass killings of civilians, deliberate attacks on civilian targets, torture of prisoners of war, political prisoners, forcible transfer of children. The list of violations is endless. And Ukraine, by contrast, has made respect for the rules of war a core principle of its defense. And I saw this myself visiting a facility for prisoners in Ukraine for Russian prisoners of war, where the personnel with such dedication make sure that they treat these prisoners how they should be treated. And that contrast is exactly, that's also what the staff of the facility says, that is what we are fighting for: barbarity against civilization. The second point is that today's discussion, and the ambassador also referred to it, is against the backdrop of Russian attempts to undermine our unity with fake, skewed peace plans. And I will not go into detail, but let me say one thing in relation to the topic of today, that we should not be surprised that Putin maybe sought immunity or impunity. And the worrying thing is that some people in the United States seemed maybe ready to accept it. That's why it's a timely event that we organize here. The European Parliament has set a clear course last Thursday with a resolution to to hopefully guide European efforts towards a just and lasting peace. Don't want to take up too much time with introductory remarks because we have an excellent panel here, so I leave it here. We will dive into the interesting topic of today, the essential topic of today, with an excellent panel. So I will move there, and we will start with the panel. Thank you so much. Working as well. Oh, I put the other one as well. Let me first get everyone in the panel here, and let me start with Mikhailo Romanov. He's already here. Can bring on the others. Yes, because Mikhailo is going to set the scene for presenting. On documenting water. Maybe you can also introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate for So thank you very much for this opportunity and for our hosting. It's really important, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm honored to be here. And taking into account so strict limitation of our event, I would like to introduce really brief introducing 3 points. First of all, who we are and what we are doing, and then I say a couple of words about our project, and then I try to present our report about torture of POW, Ukrainian POW. So, the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group is one of the oldest Ukrainian human rights organization. It traced its origin back to the Soviet era descendant movement. From 1988 onwards, the KPG was known as the Kharkiv branch of Memorial Human Rights and Historical Organization. The mission of the KPG, on the one hand, is to protect human rights and fundamental freedoms for infringement by the state, and on the other, to assist the states in asserting and protecting these rights and freedoms. So that is who we are, and what we are doing. Not now, but we try to do it all the time. But recently, really concerning the war. So our organization has formulated a comprehensive and holistic approach to collective information about international crimes committed by Russians, documenting and analyzing these crimes, and helping law enforcement agencies investigate these crimes. This also includes relaying legal, psychological, humanitarian, social, and medical assistance to victims of these crimes, as well as informing Ukrainian and international society about these crimes. The collected information entered into a database where the event location is recorded, and date of event, the type of description of event, the object of attack, and preliminary qualification of the crime under the Rome State. Today, the database contains approximately 90,000 incidents of crimes committed by Russians. Based on our research and collected information, preliminary classify these atrocities as war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Sources of information for the database are open information on the internet and direct contact with victims and witnesses. In addition to the work KPG Research Index, an important tool of such research, is monitoring reason to settlement in the occupied territory during which KPG lawyers interview the victims and find out what types of assistance they need. It is how we are working. And now a couple of words about the recent project. Documenting and analyzing international crimes committed by Russians armed forces after February of 2022, helping victims of these crimes and informing on crimes. This project continues the previous 2 years project. Has the main goal of providing maximum assistance to war victims and implements the approach we have developed, as mentioned before. In order to help as many victims as possible, it is necessary to collect information about crimes, record and analyze it, database, open criminal proceeding, and assist in the investigation. In addition, it's necessary to continue searching for victims by receiving them and conducting monitor trips to place where they can potentially be found, gathering information about their needs and providing them with legal, psychological, financial, humanitarian, and medical assistance. Separate and very important area of the project's activity is appealing to international bodies and institutions, the ICC, the CPT, and the working group of enforcement disabilities. Finally, I would like to present our report on torture. You can find the link to this report just on that table. We have this kind of flags, and we have the QR code for the link to full text of this report. But the brief description, I would like to say the following. We conducted individual interviews with 11 Ukrainian military personnel who were released from captivity. The average age of respondents was 32, and the average length of time they spent in captivity was 2 years. So all respondents have very long experience of captivity. In addition, we verified the information we received by comparing it with other data as well as with information from open sources. As a result, we obtained information with a very high degree of accuracy. And the general data collected our colleagues indicate that Ukrainian prisoners are being held in 121 places of detention in Russian Federation and 15 in the temporary occupied territories. The total number of prisoners for which there is at least some information, 2,798 persons. All Ukrainians we interviewed had traveled a long way, being transported between different colonies, but they all ended up in Moldova Republic, colony number 10. Currently, there are 20 institutions operating in Moldova, 5 of which hold Ukrainians. As I mentioned before, all prisoners have come a long way in captivity. Many of them moved between institutions 5 or 6 times. First stage was placed in premise located near the front line. These were usual hangars, garages, school premises, industrial workshops, basements, etc. In other words, premises that were not suitable for holding large number of people. So accordingly, the conditions in which the prisoners were held were terrible. Cramped, cold, with no hygiene facilities, showers, or toilet. Often prisoners were left without food for a long period of time, up to 2 or 3 days. The prisoners were held in such conditions for from 5 to 7 days. Speaking example of such places was the mothballed colony, and a large number of Ukrainian prisoners of war were held in the colony. At the time, the number exceeds 200 people. It was this colony that the Russian Federation struck with artillery, killing more than 60 Ukrainian prisoners of war. The next stage was the transfer of prisoners of war to the temporary occupied territory or to the territory of Russia Federation, away from the front line. We have identified a large number of such places of detention. In our report, you can find this location of these places. In these places, Ukrainians were held for long periods, sometimes up to 6 months. However, this place did not become the permanent place of residence. When Ukrainians arrived in this place, they underwent a so-called acceptance process. During the acceptance, prisoners were stripped naked, their clothes and personal belongings were confiscated, the prisoners were examined, the personal details were recorded, the fingerprints were taken, and samples of material necessary for DNA identification were collected. After that, the prisoners were given standardized clothing intended for prisoners' sentences to imprisonment and sent to the cells. The entire reception process was accompanied by brutal beating, humiliation, pressure, and mockery. The beating began as soon as the prisoners were uploaded from the vehicles. Each of them had to run with the head down, sometimes in a crouched position, through a corridor formed by special forces personnel and prison guards. As the prisoners ran through this corridor, they were beaten. They were beaten with their feet and hands as well as with special instruments. These could be sticks, wooden batons, rubber batons, belt with metals, bucklets, plastic pipes, etc. Electric shockers were often used to dig clothes. Material and living conditions. Often prisoners were held in cramped conditions and the premises were in need to repair. Food. Without exception, all prisoners noted that the food was meager, tasteless, and malnutrition. Medical assistance. Medical care was often absent or insufficient or untimely. There are known cases of death and disability due to lack of medical care. Prisoners note that after beaten and torture, medical assistance was never provided. They could check if a person was alive after torture and lead them to recover. Prisoners described situations where even wounded prisoners who required serious medical attention were subjected to beating and torture. And torture. According to the evidence we have received, torture is a common practice against Ukrainians who find themselves in Russian captivity. It is used against everyone without exception and throughout the entire process of transporting and transferring prisoners. Every place of detention that Ukrainian prisoners pass through has unbearable conditions. Prisoners are subjected not only to physical torture but also to psychological pressure and humiliation. The places of detention where Ukrainians are held have an atmosphere of humiliation and intimidation. Torture was used both during interrogation of prisoners and as a daily routine. During interrogation, torture was focused and as cruel as possible, as it was always carried out by a group of torturers against a single prisoner. Types of torture mentioned by prisoners include electric shock, stress position, and excessive physical exertion, sexualized methods, torture, threats and mobs, execution, suffocation, dogfight, bites, creation of inhuman conditions of detention. Each of the types of torture is described in detail in our report. All of them were characterized by cruelty and inventiveness. The prisoners testified that beaten and tortured to the point of unconsciousness, as well as death among prisoners were not uncommon. A separate form of torture was the daily coercion of prisoners to stand motionless in their cells all day long. This is how the prisoners describe it. We were told that we had to stand all the time. We were not allowed to lean, sit down, or move. We were not allowed to lift our heads. We could only go to the toilet and drink water with permission. If we did not comply, we were taken out in the corridor and beaten. We had to stand from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Another kind of abuse included forcing prisoners to rise and worship Russia and express gratitude to its authorities. The purpose of torture during interrogation. Accounts indicate that the main purpose was to obtain confessions, recognition of the action of Russian troops as justified, recognition of the authority and power of the Russian Federation and its leadership, testimony about the killing of civilians, and document cooperate with Russian authorities and security forces. And finally, we some conclusions in our research. Our research has revealed patterns and trends in the behavior of Russian authorities. These patterns undoubtedly indicate at the minimum the existence of war crimes. Systematic analysis may also indicate the existence of crimes against humanity and even genocide. In the report, we provide legal justification for our conclusion regarding the existence of criminal offenses. The basis for these conclusions is the large-scale and systematic nature of such behavior on the part of the Russian authorities and the agent. And in the overall context of the war, which will soon have lasted 4 years, we see clear evidence of genocide intent. So I stop here and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's breathtaking sometimes what you are sharing with us. Before we invite the others here to the stage and to the panel, let me ask you a question, Mikhailo. Thank you for all your work. Can you share with us what critical lessons you learned also from doing the whole research and how they are relevant for other organizations, and also what were the main challenges that you came across in setting up the whole project?
For the question, I think it's a really common challenges for every NGOs because first of all, we came across with a lack of sources. We need people, we need funding because it's really daily routine activity, documenting all these crimes and searching all this evidence and to provide interview with the victims, with the persons who really suffered after these war crimes, and this is the main challenges as for me. And I guess we had lots of other challenges, which includes that it's really huge of this kind of crimes, and we need to search all of them. We need to be patient for details because we try to verify this information in a, let's say, crossing method. We try to collect lots of information and we try to compare all of this evidence. And sometimes this method, this approach, give us a chance to know who was a perpetrator of some crimes, and probably you hear that the so-called doctor's law, who was a doctor, I guess, in Moldova and Poland. He's now we indicate this person, and not only we today recently in internet exists special investigation of Freedom Radio, which they prepared a report about this person, and this is a result of its efforts of lots of different organizations. This probably on the one hand, this is a challenge, but on the other hand, it's a chance to find someone who really perpetrates some. Thank you.
Then thank you very much for setting the scene for the further discussion. I would like to invite all the other panelists here on the podium. Wayne Jordish, Global Rights Coalition, and Marta E. Hofstad, and Stefania Kulayeva, and last but not least, and it's a deep honor to have you here with us, Maxim Butkevich. Let me start with you, Maxim, because the first question also that comes into mind is to ask you how you listen to the presentation, because you have experienced it yourself, and maybe you can also share your first impression, your first reaction when you listen to the presentation, but also maybe to share with us what you think is the best way for NGOs to deal with prisoners of war, former prisoners of war, like yourself. Otherwise, you take mine. It's okay.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to the organizers of this event. Thank you for having this opportunity to listen to the findings of the report, and thank you to Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group and Anti-Discrimination Centre for conducting this important work. It is not easy to listen to the findings. On one hand, for me, of course, there is nothing new, not only due to my own experience, but also because I communicated with my released brothers and sisters in arms after they were released, and in different locations, treatment to an extent varies. I cannot escape the thought that to a large extent I was fortunate, actually, because I didn't go through many things mentioned in the report. Well, primarily because I was never transported to the Russian proper. I was held for 2 years and 4 months in the occupied part of Ukrainian territory in Luhansk region, for 15 months in the prison of the city of Luhansk, and for the rest of the time in the prison camp in the penal colony of the regime. Just to give a brief outline, I joined the armed forces of Ukraine in the very first days of the full-scale invasion, and in June of 2022, together with 8 of my guys from my platoon, I was captured by Russian forces. The next 2 years and 2 months I spent in captivity, but in a couple of months' time of captivity, it was not enough for my captors to keep me as a POW. And they decided to fabricate a criminal case against me, as against thousands and thousands of other POWs only in the Luhansk region, and as far as we know, the overall number is much greater. They accepted confession under duress, which is a polite word for torture, and sentenced me to 13 years in the prison camp in penal colony of Detention. But overall atmosphere and main tools used by Russian Federation in different occasions are the same. There are differences, there are varieties, but in the first place, when it comes to first half a year of our activity, the food was really scarce and pretty bad. Treatment was harsh, physical violence was widespread, especially during interrogations. Excessive physical exercises were everyday routine. When the guards forced prisoners of war to do dozens and hundreds of sit-ups and push-ups until some of them started to faint. And lack of hygienic items, we didn't have any. It was common, but the main thing, the main feature was this atmosphere of fear and violence. That everyone knew that at any given moment in time, it will be the case. And the sound of steps approaching the cell is one of the most dreading sounds in captivity. And the door to the cell can open because no one knew actually what might follow. But it was almost sure that there will be nothing good out of it. When then it came to the stage of fabrication of criminal cases, I later came across several dozens, as I mentioned before, Ukrainian POWs who were convicted on fabricated charges. And just to take a step aside, only then I realized how these cases were framed. All of us were accused of attacking civilians in Donbass region for no reason, no specific reason. What Ukrainian military does in the mind of so-called investigators when he or she sees civilians just to attack them. All the confessions were extracted under torture, under threats, and threats were both physical but also people were threatened that they would be broken mentally and they would never be exchanged and they would be held in the most dreadful conditions. All the victims, as far as we understood, were real, but they were all victims of Russia's artillery fire. The Russian troops surrounded village or a town. What they've done in 2022 first was erasing it to the ground with this artillery and mortar fire. And when they finally took it over, they found civilian survivors and put the blame for their injuries upon Ukrainian POWs. It was to have certain number of people, Russian propaganda, as it turned out later, talked so much about Ukrainian war criminals. They needed to show some Ukrainian war criminals, they didn't have any. So they extracted confessions just to parade people around Russian TV channels. That was probably, as far as we can understand, the main goal of the overall exercise. We were also told that while Russian military personnel which committed war crimes in Ukraine was sentenced to prison sentences in Ukraine, Russians needed to sentence someone to exchange those war prisoners for prisoners. Unfortunately, it's not the case because prisoners of war who were convicted by Russian courts, as a rule, are not exchanged. And, almost all but one people whom I spent my time in captivity with as convicted POW are still there for more than 3 years now, and when I think about it, it breaks my heart. Yeah, when it comes to how to deal with people with this experience, when it comes to Ukrainian NGOs and those who document Russian war crimes. Well, on one hand, of course, released POWs and civilian detainees. Let's not forget about them either, because for some period of time, I was held with a mixed group of people, and among them there were civilian Ukrainian civilians who were detained by Russia quite often on complicated charges. And no matter what the charges were, the torture was applied to all of them with no differentiation. Those who are released, they possess unique knowledge as long as Russia prevents access to places of detention of Ukrainian POWs and civilian detainees to all international bodies. I should say we were waiting for International Committee of Red Cross originally. We were waiting for them, then we stopped waiting for them, then we started making jokes about waiting for them. For instance, when will you do this and that? When ICRC will visit us, which means basically never. But in the absence of these monitoring mechanisms and our interrogators, they told us bluntly, no one knows the conditions of your detention, no one has access to you, which means we can do whatever. we are responsible only to our commanders, and our commanders gave us free rein. The released POWs and civilian detainees, they possess unique knowledge what Russian system looks like from inside, and we can see now from people who can hear from people who were held in different places of detention that torture is not some sort of number of isolated incidents. Torture is a widespread and systemic policy, I would say, as well as purposeful disregard of international humanitarian law. At the same time, I sympathize with colleagues from Ukrainian NGOs who document Russian war crimes dealing with these POWs because they try to do their best to approach people who are released with care. Because of course, every documentation, every recollection of details brings back memories which can be triggering flashbacks in uncomfortable situations.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your testimony. It's we just share as well. Because you mentioned these fabricated charges and then convictions. Are they also used to keep as many prisoners of war away from a possible exchange? Because you said that if they are convicted, they cannot be eligible for exchange anymore.
This is still a big question to me, because we try to understand the system under which they select the people, how they select people whom to fabricate criminal cases against. Originally, we thought that I'm selected because I used to be a journalist and a human rights defender, because I am an officer, maybe because of that. But then I came across other convicted detainees, POWs, who were neither officers nor journalists, who were just, ordinary military personnel. It looked like they had certain quota to fill. They needed a certain number of people who could have, but whether it is to hold them from being exchanged, we don't think that's the criteria. So the question is a mystery.
And for those who don't know, how did you get out?
I was released in prisoner exchange in October last year, so now it's 1 year and 1 month since I'm released, and it's really an incredible time. And in our exchange, which had 95 persons released from Russian captivity, about half of them were convicted by Russian courts. So really hope it's like the first stage of release of convicted POWs, but unfortunately it didn't happen.
Thank you so much. Let me also bring in the rest of the excellent panel that we have here. And maybe, because I think most of the time we listen to many people, and then we ask the External Action Service, what are we going to do? I want to switch it around. What are we doing so far? How did you listen to the presentation of the report, but also to the personal testimonies? And what is the External Action Service doing in order to support through the accountability for Ukraine? Is it working?
Thank you. Is it working? Yes, it's working, yes. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity.
Marta Mitrokowska.
Yes, I work in the External Action Service in the Ukraine team, and thank you for this panel and Maxim for your testimony and for all the work that is done by our colleagues from the civil society sector. It's incredibly important, and without you, we would not be able to do the work that we are doing at the diplomatic front. And I would like to say that we, the EU, we are fully committed to ensuring full accountability for all the crimes committed by the Russian Federation. This is even more important now in the context of the diplomatic talks, which we on our side following very, very closely for accountability not to become a bargaining chip in the negotiation process. So it's incredibly important for us. We have supported Ukraine's efforts on accountability and justice since day one. Not since the full-scale invasion, but even before, we often focus on the crimes committed since the full-scale invasion. It's important to say that these crimes were committed before that, since 2014, the annexation of Crimea. So I would like to make this point, and we have been fully supporting the Ukrainian authorities in this, from evidence collection through the case building, prosecution, preparing claims, and reparations for victims. Our approach to accountability is holistic, and we support it at various levels. And first of all, I would like to highlight ongoing work on the creation of the Special Tribunal for the Crimes of Aggression. We have been a part of this process that is now taking place in the context of the work of the Council of Europe since the get-go. It's a long process. It's a very complicated, long process that will take time. And therefore, on our side, what we have been doing and what High Representative Kaja Kallas has been pressing on to keep the momentum and to garner diplomatic support for the creation of a special tribunal. Advocate members of the Council of Europe, the EU members, the Council of Europe members, but also members of the states outside of the Council of Europe to support the special tribunal and to make it happen, create the special tribunal as soon as possible. Therefore, on our side, we mobilized financial support to basically finance the advanced team, not to lose the time that will be needed to create the mechanism. So we have made funds available, 10 million euros to support this advanced team since next year. For the initial stages to start the work going. We are also active in supporting the work and creation of claims commission. This is another important angle of the work on the accountability. Claims commission that will be able to review, assess, and decide on claims for compensation for damage, injury, or loss caused by Russia. Work on this claims commission is ongoing. The draft convention establishing the claims commission was approved in October, and now in December we are going to have a high-level event, a ministerial event in The Hague. We hope the High Representative will be there as well, co-signing the diplomatic conference. The adoption, it's called the adoption and opening for signature of this mechanism, Council Claims Commission. So this is in December. Now, another angle of our work is focusing on what is happening in Ukraine, because absolute majority of the work will be done in Ukraine. There are more than 150,000 criminal cases that are opened, and therefore we are supporting the work of the OPG in Ukraine to investigate and prosecute. We are doing this in collaboration with civil society organizations and also with other members of Ukrainian authorities. We are also doing this via our CSDP civilian mission on the ground, EUAM, that is active in this regard. I would also like to highlight the angle of the ongoing reform effort in Ukraine, which the EU is supporting. And in this regard, we are collaborating closely with civil society organizations on the reform efforts, especially also with regard to the work on the criminal code. So this is another part of work that we are also supporting very, very closely. Yes.
Yeah, can I maybe stop you here for a moment? Because I want to also keep the conversation as interactive as possible. Because we will come back to you for sure. But I also want to go into the maybe more difficult parts of the topic. What is not being done yet, and what should be done, and what are the recommendations? For example, from one of the other panelists, Wayne Jordash, you, well, of course, free to reflect also on what your first impression was on what you heard so far, but in particular maybe from your global rights coalition. It is right.
Compliance,
That you can maybe also reflect on lessons learned from other truth and accountability processes that could be valuable for what we have here now. Wayne.
Thank you very much for the invite to speak on the panel, and particularly thank you to the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group for their report. I urge you all to read it. It's extremely sobering reading. It confirms what other NGOs have found, and it also confirms what the Office of the Prosecution in Ukraine are also investigating. It also confirms the critical role that NGOs like the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group now play in the justice efforts, not just in Ukraine, but globally. For a long time, criminal justice actors saw NGOs as, in some ways, in the margins of finding truth and accountability. And that, thankfully, has now changed. And it's changed not because necessarily justice actors have welcomed NGOs, but because, in fact, there's a recognition that the work will not get done without the likes of the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group. NGOs now play a fundamental role throughout the whole of the justice process. Their evidence can find its way into the International Criminal Court. Submissions under Article 15 for preliminary examinations at the International Criminal Court, laying the foundation for universal jurisdiction, laying the foundation for investigative leads, and so on and so forth. And this report by the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group is no different to that. It is a critical piece in the search for truth and accountability. And I ask a few questions here. One, if it's not the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group and other NGOs like it, who is going to do this work? The OPG in Ukraine has 9 regional sub-units, and it has a central department and an environmental department and a juvenile justice division. My organisation supports prosecution. But in total, you're probably talking about 100 prosecutors and 100 investigators who are supposed to be investigating this level of criminality. And it's not just criminality in the detention centres. That's a terrible, horrendous, but small piece of the overall criminality. I've worked in various tribunals through my career, and I don't think I've ever worked on a conflict where the breadth of criminality is so stark. Because, of course, Russia is trying to extinguish Ukrainian identity, which involves a method of detention, torture, mass killing, sexual violence, targeting of critical infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, an attempt to terrorize and force capitulation on Ukraine. That itself speaks to the volume of war crimes. The Office of the Prosecution cannot even hope to investigate all of those crimes. More importantly, or as importantly, the Office of the Prosecution works with confidential files, which means that it cannot disclose what evidence it's got to the general public in the way that Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group can do and must do. And let me just end with one final reflection. Russia has a problem, right? The people in Russia have a problem. They are fed a diet of victimization. They prefer either not to know or prefer to buy that propaganda. That is not a recent thing. The Holodomor in Ukraine in the 1930s, genocide against Ukrainian people, mass deportation of Crimean Tatars in 1944, the attack on Georgia 2008, and so on and so forth. None of that is accepted within Russia. There is a problem of truth and accountability. Now, I personally am pessimistic about accountability, but because I don't see the prospect of trials, or not many of them. That, in one sense, is only part of the battle. The big battle is truth. And I think this report, as I say, is a valuable contribution to that truth, so that eventually the Russian people can start to accept their historical narrative, an accurate historical narrative, and to start to develop an agency to actually understand that they must live at peace with their neighbours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wayne. And last but not least, for this first round of the panel, I want to come to Stefania Kulaeva from the Anti-Discrimination Centre Memorial here in Brussels. You can maybe in particular shine also a light on the difficulties when it comes to minority groups, also the sensitivity of getting all the victim witnesses, the testimonies, and so on, and all the. So please, and let me also tell you, all we have till about 12 o'clock, and we will end with a short video introduced by Stefania. So I hope to give you also room for some pressing questions in the audience, but let's first listen to Stefania and then get deeper into the conversation. Stefania.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here and very proud to be on this panel with the colleagues from Ukraine, and I want to use this opportunity to thank everybody who helped to organize it, the Ukrainian mission, our host here in Nairobi, and also European Commission that funds the project. One thing I want to say that talking about the importance of the report that the previous speaker mentioned, there are the leaflets over there with the QR code, and everybody can access the website of Human Rights Protection Group and the report. And we also brought some materials that I will put there later that published by our organization, Anti-Discrimination Centre, and presenting what we are doing on documenting war crimes in Ukraine, focusing very much on children as one of the vulnerable groups and also on minorities. There are, of course, other challenges, talking about challenges that are the first and biggest probably faced by people on the front lines, people who get to face Russian aggression themselves and trying to oppose it and get to a situation captured. That's very important. But we all know the whole population of Ukraine is suffering daily from Russian aggression, from military actions, but also just crimes that are not even military crimes, like kidnapping children or replacing them or violating rights of children in other ways. We also, since 2014, working on the Roma population in Ukraine, documenting war crimes that Russian started, Russian-related, I would say, actors of this war started to commit immediately since 2014 against Roma. We have a number of reports published on this issue, and the small video will be of both children and Roma. Here's some information that I want just to give examples of that on the leaflet that will also spread. And there are such dramatic things which, in my opinion, get a little bit less attention than, for example, abduction of children from institutions that gets very much attention, very much spoken about. But there are also other things, like recently there was a documented case when child was taken as a hostage by Russian military, directly in the place where the battles were happening, and Ukrainian military were informed that we have this 3-year-old girl in one of the houses, and now you can try to shoot us. There are also other cases of second half of 25 where they documented rape of children in occupied parts of Zaporizhia and province, and there are heavy cases of sexual exploitation. Like this military, they don't even deny sexual exploitation of children. They only try to deny that they really violently rape these girls, but they don't even deny that they were paying for sex children of 13, 14-year-old. So we try to bring attention to these cases and to these crimes, and not only to think of those in a way maybe more spoken about cases, but indeed still very important, kidnapping children from institutions and even sometimes from families, bringing them to Russia, bringing them to occupied territories, militarization of children, and denying their identity through propaganda, using children for war. We lots of proof that children are already working on creating drones, developing drones, for example, or other means, and definitely getting prepared. Some even of these kidnapped orphans taken to Russian Federation against the will of their legal representatives, lost their lives within the Russian side. So this is like a spectrum that we try to cover with our publications, and I'll put both this leaflet and that one about the Roman child who lost his life and his family and his mother's story, also so when people exit it.
Thank you very much, and as said, we will come back for sure with the video. Before I also look into the audience whether there are some pressing questions to our panel members. Let me also, because we already heard from the External Action Service what are the programs in place, what are the efforts being made, but also I would like to touch on two elements. First, asking you and maybe also Mikhailo, what do you think is really missing in terms of from your own perspective as a victim, as a former prisoner of war, and from your own experience, what is really missing from the approach, the general approach, and also, and maybe that's one for Wayne, because you clearly mentioned why it's so important for also both societies. But can you also maybe elaborate on elements from previous examples that are, in your view, crucial to bring into play, and then we come back to the External Action Service for a last comment. So can I start with you? I mean, a lot is being done. A lot of NGOs are working, External Action Service, everybody wants to do the best possible. But what, in your view, is clearly missing and you cannot leave today without mentioning that?
Well, I think it's been mentioned already. So there are several things which it's not that they're missing, but that more can be done on that. First, when I mentioned that the aggressor state, Russia, they never created a system of detention according to Geneva Conventions, as Ukraine did. I also visited one of the centers for Russian POWs in Ukraine, and I was struck by the contrast of conditions of detention of prisoners. But the lack of independent monitoring or independent international monitors who would be able to access places of detention of Ukrainian POWs is still a crucial issue. And to me, well, I still have questions to ICRC, to be honest, when it comes to that. So there is a lot of mechanisms of monitoring, although we understand that it takes 2 to 10 and Russia is just not willing to let international monitors to access these places. I'm happy to hear that there are sanctions being imposed individually upon people who are responsible for mistreatment, put it mildly, of Ukrainian prisoners of war, and I would be happy to see this trend to be ongoing, because this is important. I'm afraid quite often before when we talked about sanctions, we talked about shadow of it, which is very important. We talked about all different layers, sometimes putting detainees and conditions they're held in and treatment somehow backstage. So I'm happy to hear that this is a trend, not a trend, but a trend also to prosecute this. And of course, what's been mentioned already to me as to my colleagues from different human rights organizations, Center for Civil Liberties and the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group and many others. The principle of paying people first is important before any negotiations on ceasefire or peace, even peace can commence. One of the first steps should be release of POWs and civilian detainees. It should not be the consequence of the negotiations. It should be a precondition. And among other things, this would show to what extent Russia takes these negotiations seriously.
Yeah, it could be a sign of goodwill, which is very common in trying to get real, genuine negotiations started to show first the sign of goodwill.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. Mikhailo, briefly also from your side, because outside of the excellent work that your organization is doing, this was a clear point. Can we just make the list longer of individuals involved in the torture, involved in the fabricated court cases, charge them individually with sanctions? What is your absolutely not to miss tip for today that we should do more of, or that we should shine an extra light?
I add a couple of words about it. Again, it's not a recent topic, but I think we need to make a stress on this topic. I guess we should be more attentive to civilians, first of all, and then we should share information about Russian, say, style of change, because recently we had, me and my colleagues have kind of opportunity, kind of opinion about new tools from Russia's side. They created, let's say, plan of changing. They put some civilians, sometimes random civilians who involved in this process, and they capture these persons and let's say to bring them in this plan for changing, for future changing, and it's really a problem when some person become a status or statement as a changeable person for change with Ukrainians, POW in Russia, POW and also with the Ukrainian civilians. Material.
Yeah, so they artificially create exchange materials. Yeah, I can. Thank you. Very good point to have more, be more attentive to. Wayne, you remember what I asked?
I do, and I'm not sure I've got a straightforward answer to it, just because to the question, lessons to be learned from other tribunals or other conflicts. I think we are still very much in the stage of learning how to achieve representative accountability through complementary relationships between civil society, foreign experts and judicial authorities, which means that actually there are many lessons to be learned. And in part that's because, for example, because civilian documenters, civil society participation in international or national justice processes in conflict is quite a recent thing. It kind of came about essentially because the ICC rules enabled victim and civil CSO participation, but prior to that, the ICTY, the Yugoslav Tribunal, the Rwanda Tribunal, Special Court for Sierra Leone, civil society participation was essentially as objects. They are victims and they could lobby and advocate for change, but they were not participants. And so, in one sense, Ukraine is one of the first conflicts in which civil society actors' roles are as critical as or on a par with judicial actors. And I think, you know, just linking that answer to what is needed, I would say two things are needed in light of this sort of innovation. One is that we need a web of accountability globally, right? Certainly in Europe, because actually the national authorities in Ukraine cannot investigate and prosecute, even with the fantastic help from civil society. They can't do everything, they just can't. And we need to have countries, third countries, pushing forward with universal jurisdiction cases. We need the tribunal of aggression to not, you know, I keep hearing that it's going to take a long time to set up. That is not a good place to be. There are some great mechanisms, the Claims Commission, etc., etc. These are all essential components of Ukraine's justice, but we need to move forward with them. So it's the web of accountability which needs to be set up and be effective. And the second is, I think, a complementary relationship between civil society and the Office of the Prosecution in Ukraine. It's a frustration of mine that there has not been sufficient coordination and complementary work between the two. There are a lot of great civil society actors in Ukraine. There are a lot of great prosecutors and investigators in the judicial system. I think there needs to be more coordination around building, this is an obsession of mine, building command cases. You know, Ukraine can't investigate and prosecute everything. You need to have a focus on command cases, and this is why this report is so critical, because it lays the foundation to establish policies. Policies require leaders to design them and implement them. This is a step towards going to where real responsibility lies. Of course, that's not to say responsibility doesn't lie with the individual torture, but the head of the FSB, the head of the Federal Penitentiary Service, all the way up to Putin. That's the goal, to investigate and prosecute there, in my view. And for that, you need complementary relationship and a day-to-day working relationship between civil society and the judicial authorities in Ukraine and foreign actors.
Excellent. Then unfortunately, I'll come back to you, Marta, because I have at least two very concrete points. Can we expand the list of individually targeted functionaries involved in the torture, but also the addition of Wayne just now? How can we really put a bit more pressure on and focus on these command cases, so-called command cases? And well, it's not the European Parliament that has shied away from calling for these issues in the past months and years. But can you, without that we hold you to account, but can you shine a bit of light on how we can all together also help you and all other relevant institutions, in particular the linkage also between the civil society, which is a unique feature of the current situation in Ukraine, how we can better link this extensive experience and knowledge of the civil society to getting about the two concrete points, the point of getting more individuals on sanction list and the command case. Sorry for the difficult question.
No, it's very, very good, very pertinent questions. Look, on sanctions, we have been doing this. We have 19 packages. We have several thousand individuals and entities who are sanctioned. Individuals and entities who are sanctioned with regard to accountability, violation, or crimes pertaining prisoners of war and children, especially children. As of the last package, we have a new criterion with regard to children that will allow us to focus on sanctioning individuals and entities who are involved in the militarization, in the abduction, in the transportation, all kinds of cases. So yes, my short answer is yes, we will continue to do so, and this is one of our tools to exert pressure. We have been working on this closely with our Ukrainian colleagues. We have established channels of cooperation. So absolutely, if there is evidence, materials that can support us in building the cases on our EU side, yes, absolutely, we are happy to receive them and to work on these cases to bring more individuals and entities on the sanctions list. Coming back to one of the points that Maxim mentioned on prisoners of war, we will continue advocating for the return of prisoners of war, civilian detainees and children. Particularly, the topic of children is high on our agenda. You may recall that President Ursula von der Leyen, she announced that there will be a summit dedicated to the return of children organized by the EU in cooperation with Ukraine, Canada, International Coalition for the Return of the Children. The summit will take place next year. So we hope to also draw political attention and also to exert pressure on the Russian side to bring the children back to Ukraine. And we will continue on our side to support creating the mechanisms, creating this web of accountability for the instruments to be in place. And as the next step on our side, after the creation of the Claims Commission, will be the compensation fund for Ukraine to pay for the crimes that it committed. It's a long road, but we will continue our efforts and we will continue building the consensus among member states to bring those who committed the crime to account.
Yes. The point about profiting at maximum level from the civil society in Ukraine, which, as Wayne pointed out, is a rather unique feature in Ukraine, because in previous cases of tribunals and accountability, there was not such a close cooperation, combined with the fact that, and that was also pointed out, that the workload is so big that we hardly can see the end of it. The hundreds of thousands. Yes, it will grow, but we need to start somewhere, and the command cases were mentioned by Wayne. We also need to keep the flame alive, so to speak. I mean, we will keep the flame alive together because we will not give up. 5, 10, 15 years. I mean, before people also didn't believe in the Yugoslav tribunal. Nobody believed in it when it was set up. And it delivered results. So our message should be accountability will be served. People who committed war crimes will be brought to justice. That is for us to keep fighting. But we need tangible results. We need the people on the sanctions list, very good, but also that we start working somewhere. And I think the idea of starting with the command cases and trying to at least help the Ukrainian judiciary to start off a couple of these cases. Can you say something about that?
Look, we are happy to support. On our side, you have our full commitment to support the Ukrainian side in doing that. We have instruments in place, we have financial needs in place, there is FPI, there is Ukraine facility, we have a civilian mission, which I mentioned on the ground. We are part of the ACA group in Kiev. There are instruments in place, and we are happy to do that.
We will try to see if there are people who have a pressing question.
Can I just add to that?
Yes.
I wouldn't want to give the impression the EU funds my organisation. No, but it's the largest funder of my organisation, and I think In large part, that funds is spent on supporting the building of command cases. And, you know, we shouldn't be disappointed that the Ukrainian prosecutors have not built them yet. It's 3.5 years on after the full-scale invasion in very difficult circumstances. But they're beginning. Recently, the Kiev prosecutor issued a notice of suspicion for a commander in Bucha who was giving orders to commit crimes. These are the types of cases which will now emerge, and the EU, I think, is doing a great job in supporting these activities.
Okay.
I wanted to defend it.
No, that's very true.
It's true.
No, but it's my job to even when the EU is doing quite okay, to push further. That's my job. Any pressing question in the audience? I will come to you with them. Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah. It's okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm Katarina Ritrakov-Lemers. I'm a director of Ukrainian Institute in Germany. Thank you, Stefania, for inviting me then to listen. I just have a very probably stupid question. All of you probably know the answer, but is EU also, who is financing European Red Cross? Because I read the news the day before that Red Cross in Russia is organizing paramilitary events for Russian children, and I know that Red Cross is not doing the job in Ukraine. As is EU also doing something with Red Cross? Can we pressure the existing instruments, for example, for control via something?
Yes.
The EU is supporting international mechanisms, and ICRC is part of it. We are in close dialogue. I'm sorry. We are in close dialogue with ICRC on their work, and we know how things stand. Ukraine has been doing tremendously well when it comes to sharing information and how to say, treatment in short, but we know that the lack of will is on the Russian side. So ICRC can do as much as it can do, depending on the Russian will, and we know what it is.
But I remember from dealing with political prisoners in Belarus, for example, that the ICRC in Belarus is notoriously linked to the regime of Lukashenko.
Also, well,
Yeah.
it's not the ICRC. There are various processes. I'm not an expert, but there are various processes, and ICRC is a international Red Cross, and there is a Russian Cross. There's Federation. These are various organizations.
Yeah, but if the director, the local director, is somehow as impartial as he or she should be. I mean, maybe we should not even dive too much in it. I don't know either the details, but I do know the example that was given here, because in that facility in Ukraine, in Lviv, the Ukrainian prison authorities left the International Red Cross for 5 days to inspect everything.
Of course, yes.
I mean, I don't even ask for 5 days. I want an inspection for 1 day in the facility where.
What I can say that we don't support the Russian Red Cross. That's clear.
Okay. Question there.
Hello, my name is Ilya Nuzov. I work at the International Federation for Human Rights. And I have a question, and actually maybe a request for advice. So we're involved in many advocacy efforts around the world, and one of them is to convince states to support the special tribunal for the crime of aggression. And oftentimes we face this criticism that, well, there's a double standard in operation here. You know, Ukraine benefits from all these further accountability, while some other situations don't. Notably, let's say, use example of Syria or Palestine is often involved. So how can you know, maybe you can give us a couple of tips on how can we address these arguments? What counter arguments we can use to say that, well, you still need to support this tribunal, especially if we target countries like in the global south, if we go outside of the sort of the EU that we know there's support here for.
That's one specific person you want the advice from.
No, whoever wishes to.
Okay, who wants to pick up on this question?
I'm happy to.
Yes,
Yeah.
take the microphone.
We can't. That's the truth. I mean, you know, there was a crime of aggression against Iraq. That is a little different to the crime of aggression in Ukraine, but it still was a crime of aggression. So, you know, I think there is a lot of contradictions. There's a lot of unfairness, but I just think we have to base our arguments on now rather than trying to find congruence or symmetry, because I just don't think it exists. I mean, there are, of course, good reasons why you couldn't have a tribunal for the crime of aggression in somewhere like Syria. You know, there are good reasons, which we've got to find those reasons as well. But there are some contradictions and some inconsistencies which I just don't think that can be reconciled. And I think the more we try to pretend that they can, the more we tangle ourselves up into a mess.
Not the advice that we wanted, maybe, but it's very honest. Stefania, you wanted to add something on this point?
No, I just wanted.
No, but we are still on time, or do people?
We have plus 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh,
But it's okay, we don't have to take up all the time that we have. Are there any, on this point?
On this point,
Please.
I just look at, you know, I'm totally with you, but the fact that in some cases international law was violated and there was no appropriate reaction doesn't mean that we should perpetuate it. If we can do it this time, we should do it, especially given the fact, and to me it's a fact, that this war Russia wages it not only against Ukraine, it wages it against what remains still of international law and the international security system and the international humanitarian law. So it is a policy to consistently undermine that in Russia's actions. This is why we shouldn't let them do this. We should protect what remains, because otherwise we slide into the totally different world where might makes right. So to me, it's like we should do it at least this time. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves in a totally different world.
Thank you very much for that very, very valuable addition. Is there another question in the audience?
I'm a lecturer at TLP. And first of all, I would like to thank all the Ukrainian visitors for coming here and giving their testimony. And we were speaking about the cases, we were speaking about the possible prosecutions, and obviously justice is important for the international law, but also for the recovery of the victims. And my question is about this. Is the current way that the prisoners of war who were exchanged and the civilians who return home, is the current support sufficient? What is the way, how they are taken to charge? Who is supporting them? Thank you.
Want to know from?
Those who are aware, who could answer this question.
Okay. Already taken.
Well, maybe to a limited extent, I'm aware because I went through the relevant procedures. Some apologies. There is a system in place for initial reintegration and rehabilitation of those who come back. There are medical services available and psychological support, but it is for initial periods of time, for initial 3 to 4 weeks time. And then some people have to continue medical rehabilitation, especially those whose health was really badly affected by the captivity. And unfortunately, no one gets out of captivity being healthier than he or she was before.
Russian prisoners in Ukraine do that.
Yeah.
Get out 4 or 5 kilos more weight and uniforms washed.
Yeah, there is a different start contrast, as I said. At the same time, there is a number of problems, mostly related to long-term rehabilitation or long-term effects upon health and psychological and emotional consequences. So there is still a pressing need to create a system which would be available to those who are in this activity for months and months to come, because some people have start to feel certain effects only several months after release from captivity. And there are some legal issues related to civilian detainees as well, because for civilian detainees the procedure is a bit different. I will not go into that because it would just derail us. But there is a need for changes because civilian detainees are currently treated under the law which was adopted before the political invasion, when the numbers of civilian detainees were totally different and the circumstances were different. And just recently there was this, these days I believe, or maybe today, the statement from Ukrainian NGOs dealing with civilian detainees suggesting that the laws and regulations on that are adopted and enacted.
Very good, thank you very much, Maxime. I do want to have sufficient time for the video and a brief introduction by Stefania. For that, I regrettably need to ask the other panelists to sit down because I think we need that. But I want a real heartfelt applause for all of them.
Words about video. It is a
Just a few words before we start watching it. It's a case that was documented this year in September in Odessa. I recorded it first time. Later, our colleagues from organization Winds of Changes did the audio record specially for this small artistic work, later done by two young artists. Ostap Kuchar made the sound and the music and announced Nicholas pictures. And you can hear the voice of the lady whose case we recorded, because I think sometimes human rights reports are the best way to inform people about war crimes and suffering of the people, but sometimes more emotional way to present it is also needed, especially now when unfortunately attention of many people gets less emotional and less intensive to the solution.
Thank you so much again to the panelists, but also to the Deputy Ambassador of Ukraine still here with us. Before we watch together, I already also say goodbye. Thank you all so much for coming and for attending this timely discussion with us.
Ми там проживали на квартиру, все було у нас хорошо, отлично, а потім почалась війна, почали стріляти. У нас були проблеми, вони постійно до нас цеплялися. Все позакривалося, роботи не було ніякої. А потім почали малого Пашку катати на БТРах. Ну, я думала попервах, що його вкрадуть у мене. А ні, вони його возили в центр на БТР, купляли йому віші, їсти давали. Я його шукала, потім вони привезли, кажуть, не переживайте, ми вашого Пашу не заберемо, він нам просто понравився. Ну, наші заїхали, українці, почали нашу країну захищати від них. І почала стрільба. І отак і случилося, що ми приїхали отуди вас, в Одесу. Мені 4 рази робили операції на ногі. І на язику в мене 2 зуба немає, їх треба вставляти. І на язику остався осколок, тому що мені не хотіли різати, щоб я не стала знімати, поняв? Він сильно високо осколок піднявся язику. І отак і не встався. І все. Потім моя дитина упала під дрон і через 3 дня померла. Шахет. Біля калітки було розрив і дитини 3 дня він помер. Йому просто живот пробило осколками і все. Дитина не видержала і помер.
І ти в цей час ще була вагітна?
Так. Ми там жили, прожили, потім виїхали сюди. Тільки я не знаю, як цей район називається. І допомогли нам квартиру купили. Ми купили собі хату. І зараз живемо. Важко, правда, ми тут нікого нічого не знаємо. Тут нам тяжело дуже. Світ почали виключати кожен день почти.